Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we are very excited to welcome back Sam Armenia, better known as Sammy J Online, who is the VP Corporate Development at C21 Investments. We're excited to spend some time with him. Sammy's been, a real source of insight in the cannabis space, but we're excited to spend some time kind of working through some pretty standout earnings from last quarter, as well as talk about the Nevada footprint and then kind of where we go from here in terms of the broader cannabis space. It's always an interesting time. I know we always joke in the cannabis space, it's never boring, and that has held true. So we're going to spend a good amount of time kind of chatting through where we are at the current moment and kind of where C21 is moving ahead through the rest of the year and beyond. So with all that said, anyone out there and joining, really appreciate it. This should be a good one. So if you have any questions, comments, a good reminder to throw them in the comments and we'll try to get to them as we go along. With all that said, I know that was a ton. Sammy, thanks for being on. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me again, Mackenzie.
Of course, anytime. It's great to chat. I figured just because there might be people who are joining in or new, I know we want to jump into earnings and get into the guts of things, but maybe to start, would love to start with kind of C21 as a whole and maybe kind of how your story, aligns with C21.
Okay, well, we are a single state operator in Nevada. We were the first licensed operator in the state, now almost over 10 years now since we launched. And we have, we have a fully vertical cultivation retail footprint there. We are very much an outlier in, I would say, in the publicly traded cannabis space, but probably in Nevada in general, as far as our operating performance and what we've been able to achieve. It's been a long, winding road, much like the industry in general to get here. We started out in 2018 with Oregon as well, and made a decision early on to kind of focus on the single state where we saw the highest returns and the best operating results. So we recently expanded. Well, it's not recent anymore. It's almost 18 months ago now. But we had expanded our retail footprint there, and the results have been very encouraging with what we've accomplished. We've done. I would say we have a very differentiated model versus what you may come across in the industry. In that we've taken it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to to put it in action. We've taken a very shareholder kind of friendly lens on how we do everything virtually. So that is, we paid off our senior debt, which was a $30 million senior debt using free cash flow. We have less shares out now than we did 5 years ago. With buybacks this year, I think we bought back about 2.3 million shares this year. Any and every decision we make is this good for the shareholder? Is this through a creative lens? How do we build value for this company? Because ultimately we don't win unless our shareholders win. And so we take that approach very seriously. When it comes to, most recently, how has that translated in our results? We can proudly say we have the only double-digit same-store sales growth in the publicly traded cannabis space. We grew 15% in our 3 big stores in Nevada year over year. That is against a backdrop where the state was -16 over the same period. So tremendous outlier results that way. And there's a lot to talk about how, why Nevada is struggling so much and how are we able to kind of differentiate ourselves in that market. But just to go, quickly through some of those results, that's really translating down the income statement. So our gross margin was up over 50%. Our operating income was up 300% year over year. Our EBITDA was up over 70% year over year. Our free cash flow was up over 90% year over year. So, we're ticking every box right now. And we're doing that in a very competitive and difficult landscape. And it speaks to our model, obviously, and what we're doing well. So, if you want to dig into, why Nevada is, in some ways, Nevada is emblematic of what's going on in the industry at large. So it's almost a tale of 2 cities in Nevada. You have the north, which is the Reno area, which is where all of our stores are, and you have the South, which is the large population center with Vegas.
Mhm.
And the state may be down 16% as a whole, but there's a very big difference between the two geographic areas of the state. Vegas is being basically destroyed by the intoxicating hemp market, which has been allowed to run rampant and free in the Strip, servicing tourists and stuff like that, while the state legal operators have been kind of boxed out of that, of that zone. And so, what used to be people would go into Vegas, for whether it's conferences or for fun, they would make their way to the state legal operators that are off the Strip. They don't have to do that anymore. There's smoke shops, hemp shops everywhere. I'm sure taxi drivers are selling it out of the back of their cars. And you have the DoorDash and the direct delivery to hotel rooms with the federally compliant hemp, at least until last week.
Sure, yeah.
And so, there is a Vegas operator in the publicly traded sector that was minus 28 year over year. And so, if you see us kind of, a lot of the North operators are probably holding on fine. We were up 15%, and then you see the impact that it's having in Vegas, and it kind of offsets, dramatically. So it's tough times, and it is, yet to be determined with what happened last week with the loophole closing,
Yep.
how that's going to impact the Vegas market and Nevada as a whole. What kind of enforcement's going to take place. I've talked to many Vegas operators. Obviously, it's my job, to look at opportunities on where we should, grow and move next. And, most of the operators I speak with there say, we just can't compete because, I had one operator that I know, he went into 6 or 7 smoke shops, hemp shops to see what's going on. He was taken into the back room where they're selling $600, pounds in the back room of California state legal weed, and, marking it as hemp. And so, there's been a lot of this, is this one industry? Is this two industries battling right now? Is it one plant, one set of rules? Like, how is this going to happen? Moving forward, what's the framework going to be? Nobody knows. I think part of what we're seeing in the stock market is reflecting that uncertainty right now, with the unknowns of, and also the messaging around what happened with the hemp loophole and the ban, right? Where it was, a lot of the major media framed it as a THC ban.
Mhm.
And for not everybody's staring at this space the way we do all day, every day, and, tuned into the discourse on X about, the difference between these two markets. For most people outside looking in, THC ban, oh my God, I got to get out of this space, right?
Mhm.
I've got to stop investing in cannabis stocks. So I think a lot of what we've seen over the last week, and the significant drawdown in the space over the last week, is just that uncertainty about what does this mean for state legal cannabis? What is it? Is this THC ban going to spill over? Has this admin done a 180, and are they now not supportive of cannabis like they've been messaging? The opposite of what they've been messaging. If you think of the endocannabinoid video that President Trump, posted not that long ago, where it claimed that, CBD, hemp-derived CBD, is very beneficial for seniors and for veterans, and all the messaging has been, one where we should be embracing the plant, and then they just pulled the rug out. And I think everybody's really confused as to what that means moving forward. I would caution people to not read too much into price action as determining what the narrative is. We've seen this from time and time again in this sector that's so illiquid, so thinly traded, that a blip like this can cause what we've seen, 35-40% drawdown, and people assume that somebody knows something.
Yep.
But it takes a relatively very small amount of capital withdrawing from the sector to cause this. And that could be just people saying, I'm going to wait until there's clarity. It could be some people misunderstanding what the messaging was around the hemp loophole closing, a broader THC ban. And it could be, there's always tax loss selling at this time of year as well. So, we often fit narrative to price in the stock market in general, but in this space especially. And I would caution people not to do that because, these stocks went, the ETF in the industry went from 2 to 6 on, the opposite, right? Hope that, or discourse that something was going to change. And that's how easy it is for, dramatic swings in movement in this space on very, very relatively very small amounts of capital. So, just a word of wisdom or a word of advice, don't assume that the game is over or that something has dramatically changed yet. We have not been, told by this admin how they're going to treat cannabis moving forward, other than rescheduling is ongoing, right? I mean, that's all we know, and that we're supposed to hear something soon. And, the leaders in this space that are probably closer to the admin than I am, have assured us that what they're hearing is that process is continuing and ongoing. There was the conference in Washington on Monday, which I think you were at, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
I'm sure you heard the same, right?
Yep.
The messaging is that nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
despite
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Despite what's happening in the stocks in the sector, I think it's not indicative of what's actually going on behind the scenes.
I think that's really fair. I think, we talk a lot about how market hates uncertainty in general. I think that is even more true in cannabis. I think there's, like you're saying, a high sensitivity to, things moving positively or uncertainty and kind of not understanding where things could go from there. Because I think you're right in the broader picture. I think there's a lot of confusion around what this new regulation for hemp means in terms of how the administration views cannabis. But I even think within kind of the group of people that are following cannabis more closely, I think there is sort of that uncertainty around, where things could go. But I do think, we'll tap into, I guess, more specifically your views in terms of, what you think it might be in terms of laying out a path towards rescheduling. Because I know we've seen some signs and signals that things are getting kind of tidied up and cleaned up. And this could be, in my view as well, sort of a path towards, getting things kind of organized and sorted before the rescheduling element of things. But yeah, I think ultimately, like you're saying, uncertainty, I think for people who are, looking at the longer story, I don't think this is something to really shake people. But yeah, not surprised in the short term to see things move a lot. So I do
I mean,
want to
one thing the market's telling us is that, reform is the first, second, third, fifth, 10th, 12th, 100th most important thing to these stocks and to these companies. Again, I laid out what our numbers were a couple of weeks ago, double-digit growth, huge jumps in our profitability metrics, and we're down as much, if not more, than most every company in that period. We're also one of the best performers, year to date, if you zoom out a bit. So, but, fundamentals are virtually last at this point on what is actually translating to the stocks, unfortunately, but also could be opportunity, right? If there are strong operators, if there's operators that aren't distressed in the space, these kinds of sell-offs, present opportunity. So
yeah, I agree there. I definitely think they can't not matter forever. I think, hopefully we do see, like you said, ever scheduling. And then I think those things come to the forefront.
Well, and unfortunately, we've seen they have mattered in the distressed cases where we've already seen some companies fall off the board because the over leverage that took place in this space because capital dried up, everybody was forced to take on debt, and I was doing some of the math even on the leaders in this space. If you look at the top 5 in operating margin, so operating profit, the operating income line on the income statement, TerrAscend was like 17.1, which was phenomenal. We were tied with Truly for 14.5-ish. Anyways, there's 5 that are double-digit operating margin. A couple of the other tier ones. Once you apply the interest expense, so and go to like a pre-tax earnings margin, it's incredible how damaging the leverage is in this space, right? So I think we become the pre-tax earnings margin leader by far. We're at like 13.9% because we virtually have no debt. Just a very small amount left that we're paying off because we pay the principal every month. And a lot of those companies that have double-digit operating margin, unfortunately, fall to kind of low single-digit, pre-tax earnings margin because most of their operating profit is eaten up by interest expense, the cost of carrying their debt, right? So that's it's been a problem for this space for a while. Clarity on 280E, obviously with rescheduling is obviously a massive improvement for these income statements, but also, what's not talked about a lot is what it will do for the cost of capital for the space, right? And I think that's probably more important.
Yes,
The
that was
ability for
definitely.
these companies to clean up their balance sheets, to get either lower cost debt, to capitalize some of the debt, recapitalize some of the debt. It's going to transform the space. And really, right now, the two most punitive costs for this industry are, the tax and the interest. So both of those kind of getting solved in some way is going to transform the industry, right? And I think most people know that, and that's why the bets are placed, right? That if this happens, it's a different game for everybody. So
No, I think that's true. That was definitely a theme on Monday's conference between a good amount of operators, between lowering the cost of capital and then also just welcoming in more capital that is waiting on the sidelines, which I know we've had that discussion before. Just waiting for that clarity to be able to get in the mix a little bit more. And I think looking to other areas where there is more regulatory clarity and how that shows up in the numbers is hopefully a good sign, I think, for when we see that hopefully in the US as well.
yeah.
I'm seeing a quick question, which is interesting. I think it's more specific to Nevada and kind of getting a sense there. I also see Jane is answering it as well. So let's see if you have any different views. But I think asking about the breakdown between residents versus tourists. And then I think Jane is saying that the customer base is mostly, by far, 90% locals. Is that?
Closer to 95 to 99% local.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
There's very limited tourism in the Reno area in the north. It used to be, I think, bigger than it is now. And one of the things that's really happened to Vegas, beyond hemp's infiltration into that market, and is the drop in tourism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's dramatic, and you could point to Canada being in some sort of economic tariff war with the U.S., where I think probably the largest tourist base is Canadians going to Vegas. And we've, Canadians, I'm Canadian, so apologies, but we're not traveling to the US for vacation right now.
For
Because
cultural
of what's
reasons,
been,
ultimately.
yeah,
Yeah.
what's been going on. I think the inflationary pressures on Main Street, right, are really far greater than, what the administration may be wanting to talk about right now. And also what you see with Wall Street, right? There's not a lot of breadth on Wall Street right now, other than the Big 10 kind of tech companies, because consumer packaged goods companies, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering right now. If you look at, and it's not just alcohol, it's across the board, right? So that's telling us something. The inflationary pressures on the consumer spend, right, on the consumer's wallet. Give you an example of that in how it relates to our business or in cannabis in general. The size of the basket has dramatically decreased. So what you're seeing, and what we just announced a record quarter for transactions. We're up 19% year over year, something like 185,000 customers for the quarter. So that's fantastic, right? You're growing your customer base, but the basket size is down, and that's across the board in every state. And that's speaking to, price compression on one hand, which is, virtually in every market in the US, but it's also speaking to the fact that the consumer has less dollars to spend. And because it's a cash industry and there's no credit for the most part, at least for the state legal operators, right? People can only spend what they have. And people have less right now. So
I think that is true across the board, and I don't want to take away from that, and not to take a blindly optimistic spin on it. But I do wonder if there's some amount of, I feel like people who are really seasoned cannabis users probably have a larger basket size, I would imagine, versus someone who's getting into cannabis and kind of trying things out and learning. So if you're
Sure, of
attracting
course.
more customers, wouldn't that on average lower, I would imagine, right? Lower the basket size? Could that be
Especially
part of it or
if you're
no?
bringing in new segments of the
Yeah.
population, seniors,
Yeah.
maybe women,
Yeah.
trying edibles, things like that. Like, of course, right? Versus, the more active user, right? The more active daily or weekly user,
Mhm.
for sure, right? There's no question. We actually we look at it on a store by store basis because there's almost a very micro geography that happens in the north.
Mhm.
And it's kind of the most affluent area, which is our new store, is actually the smallest basket size, which is
Mm.
the opposite of what you would think. The most blue collar area is actually the one holding the best that way. So it's interesting how that works, and what that speaks to. Bruce has some theories on what each one of our stores represents as a kind of image of what's going on in the market, like on a macro basis, economic basis, socioeconomic basis, things like that.
Trying to
Uh,
extrapolate out sort of what is
yeah,
going on in the world. Interesting. Well,
yeah,
so I wonder what
yeah.
it means. Wealthy are spending less generally because it's maybe going into investments and other things.
Or
I
that
don't know.
store, to your point, is bringing in that newer segment of the
Space.
population that is not, full-fledged cannabis users, but
Mhm.
trying things out, and are, maybe our blue collar, more long-standing mature store is really servicing the very dedicated, locals, repeat customer.
Yeah,
It's
interesting.
possible. Obviously there's competitive things that go on. It's a competitive market in the north. And we're seeing that it's not just, this isn't just a Nevada story, right? We're seeing that in New Jersey, right? Tremendous price compression on the basket. And what is that telling us? It's telling us that there's probably going to be a maturation for all markets, right? To a price point. If you think of, we sell eights at around 20 bucks, okay?
Mhm.
And if you think of cannabis as a vice and you think about the price per, event or usage, right? Like it's a very affordable, vice when you compare it to alcohol, right? Like the cost of beer or the cost of wine or whatever.
Mhm.
$20 for an eighth, an eighth's going to last you a bit, right? And unless you're like a very aggressive user, but
Yeah.
we're talking about a couple bucks maybe a day at most, where one beer costs you more than that. So there is a point, I think, where the cost of cannabis is very favorable in terms
Yeah.
of a consumer product.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the mature markets, the West Coast markets, Nevada, we're seeing that stabilize there in that kind of $20 range.
Mhm.
Then you also wonder with hemp, uh, hemp's not, or had, we're talking about hemp in the current, but hemp's changed last week. So I'm thinking of it more in the context of the past.
Mhm.
Hemp wasn't subject to the 10% cultivation tax in Nevada. Hemp's not subject to the 15% excise tax, nor the 280, nor the testing every 5 pounds of product, like the regulatory costs of being a state legal operator, right? We can't compete with those operators. But I don't see any hemp pricing, from what I've come across, that says, well, it's a $10 experience, so of course everybody's going to flock from the $20 experience to the $10 experience, right? It's not, that's not the case. So I think there is a floor on the cost of these things. There's probably a lot more profit that
Mhm.
has existed in the hemp market because they haven't been subject to all those extra costs. But the fact that we've grown our customer base as dramatically as we have over the last year, while hemp has proliferated in Nevada, tells me that it's not a siphon off, right, of the state legal user.
Mhm.
Um, maybe it's siphoned off a lot of growth of new users in the or
Mhm.
like tourists in a place like Vegas, right, where it's just ease use, the convenient factor, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of the conversations in the conference that I think I've had generally with other people as well has been around sort of what has hemp been able to give us in terms of exposing people to cannabis, because ultimately intoxicating hemp, cannabis, same thing. Although I think you can get into a riskier position if there's not that regulation, that testing, like you're saying. So you might get a fine experience, you might have a bad experience if it's less tested and regulated. But in terms of creating more demand, ultimately kind of not broadening, making the pie bigger ultimately in terms of
Yeah, it's
users for cannabis.
the optimistic way to look at it for sure.
Well, I think it's some way to look at it. I'm curious. So I feel like a lot of the conversation was on how to transition people from sort of the hemp side of things and sort of the expectations around, the experience with hemp into the legal framework for cannabis. Is that something that's on your radar in the same way, just because you are far away from the Vegas market? So is
Yeah.
there any sort of on-ramping in the area that you're in, or is it
Not in
less?
our specific
Okay.
company, but I think about all of these things in terms of, we're an operator that's part of this small community of public operators, right? That, what's going to make the world better for all of us. And, obviously we're going to need some framework and clarity from the administration moving forward. There's no question about that. But, I wrestle with you see that news a couple of weeks ago, 94%, there was a grand jury study that 94% of the Pennsylvania hemp market was, tested hot, right? So it's not really hemp, it's illicit cannabis. And there was a lot of pesticides, and there's a lot of, synthetics. And so there's the one side of the argument that says, like, all this is bad, we got to stop this, right? And then there's the other side of the argument, which you're seeing a lot of noise about right now, which is the more one plant, one solution angle of this, which is, understandably, if we're going to go to war with, if state legal cannabis is going to go to war with hemp, I don't think it serves the greater purpose of the industry, right? So there has to be some sort of compromise and meeting point. I don't know if it's achievable between the two sides, or if it's just simply going to happen because a framework is going to be laid out, which puts these two in the same bucket. And essentially, you all have to be tested. You all have to, pay a state tax. You're all going to be regulated by the state programs that already exist. That's probably how this is going to play out. Are there going to be, there's obviously the hemp industry is going to push back over the next 12 months while they can, to try to get carve outs, to try to get this repealed. I don't know if that's going to be successful, but I if I was in the admin, I'd be thinking more in terms of how do we merge these two that have grown vastly different paths, right? One being overregulated and overtaxed, one is basically circumvented all of that. And how do we capture all of this in a market that's regulated, safe, tested, age gated, probably most importantly, because one of the problems with the gas station weed, obviously, is that the youth can get their hands on it. And, I don't think anybody should be okay with that, right? So the idea that state legal cannabis is, a bunch of prohibitionists that just want to protect, like, I don't think that's being fair. And I also don't think it's fair if state legal says all of the hemp, is bad and it should all be gone, because it's just not realistic, right? It grew into a 25-30 billion dollar market, and you're not putting that back in in the bottle, right? You're not closing that box up. So how do we best move forward with what we have in front of us is going to be some sort of regulatory federal framework that age gates, tests, regulates, and ideally, deschedules. But I think Cory Booker mentioned at that conference on Monday, right? He used to be the, I'm laying in front of safe banking. I'm laying down in front of safe banking because it's not enough. To, I think any progress right now would be good progress, right? So you see these kind of pivots, even in the messaging from a senator like that that's been very vocal on cannabis for a long time. That, yes, I think we all think descheduling is the right place to be. However, can we get there from a Schedule 1 world that we're currently in one shot, or do we need progress, right?
Yeah, it's hard to tell between incrementalism and sort of,
Yeah.
one-shotting it ultimately. But I do
Yeah.
wonder, it's hard to extrapolate. Again, it's so tempting to do that. I think that's such a human thing. But from hemp being, the loophole being kind of closed down, I think a lot of people probably didn't expect that to happen so quickly and so swiftly. I feel like it's something that had been talked about for a really long
I don't think
time.
anybody was ready for that one.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things, but that is a big major change. So I think it is proof in my mind that big change is possible, whether that is something even as not small, but um, something like Schedule 3 versus full deschedule is possible to do. I do hope though, like kind of what you're saying is,
The problem is we already have a process that's been ongoing for a couple of years. We already have a provisional rule. We already have a 230-page document from the HHS supporting the provisional rule. And so if you're going to kind of pull that and restart this whole process again, you're talking about years wasted, but also years, forward before you get to a place. And I think, we're one step away from a rescheduled kind of Schedule 3 where medical has value, and let's start building from here. And somehow finding a framework, probably at the state level, a States Act type thing where, the good hemp operators, and it can be argued how many, some say it's the majority of the hemp industry, some say it's the minority, but the ones that want to play, by the right rules, become part of it. It's going to be interesting either way how it plays out. None of us are going to be determining how it plays out. But I think it would be very hypocritical of the administration to come out and say medical, I hear great things about medical has value. The HHS FDA report, putting out an endocannabinoid video saying how helpful this is for seniors, and then say blanket, we're staying Schedule 1. Like, it would be completely hypocritical. It also doesn't make much logical sense. I think having more balanced view on what's really going on behind the scenes is probably save you some heartache right now. Don't assume that the price of the stocks is telling you what's going on behind the scenes, right? Because we're talking about, sometimes the sector as a whole doesn't trade $10 million. So, how much can you deduce from what that is telling you? Other than we don't have buyers, which we've talked about before, when I've been on, right? Like the incremental buyer for this industry is on the sidelines, been on the sidelines for a long time. Everybody knows that federal reform is the catalyst. It hasn't happened yet. And so, it is what it is, right? Until I don't even think, if every company in the industry put out double-digit same-store sales growth like we did, and everybody had a really exciting kind of narrative on a fundamental basis right now, would that bring in, the money that's on the sideline? I still don't think that would change things.
Yes, I think that changes when things change on the federal side. I think from definitely an institutional perspective, but even like you're saying on a retail perspective, I think people want that clarity and want at least that big step to know that things are headed in that right direction. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Saying no, which is great. Seeing a question or comment from Jane. It feels like the video Trump put out ahead of now closing the loophole was intentional, like a sign that this is part of a bigger plan. I know it's easy to read into. What's your thought in terms of like you're saying?
I think it's intentional. I think there's a plan. I think it's playing out. A lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but a few people at least had this idea of, busting illicit grows, and kind of, there's so much of that bit has been going on over the last few months. Closing a loophole before you kind of reschedule, because otherwise it's going to be a free for all. And now laying out a kind of a framework for regulation moving forward. I think it all logically makes sense that this was already planned and that there's a process in place. We're just not privy to it, right? So we're all just always trying, with the little bits of information we have, trying to, patchwork what we think is happening. And, if you kind of step back and think what has happened to date, it kind of all makes sense. That being said, without the last, piece of the puzzle happening, it's not ideal.
No, that's very fair. All right. Well, then I feel like operating in that environment and moving ahead again, I think you've put up some great numbers, which is great to see, but kind of looking ahead under wherever we go, if we do see rescheduling in the much more shorter term, or if it is, a little bit farther off where we see it, how does that affect what you're looking at, strategy and growth? I think, would Las Vegas ever be attractive again at some point in terms of an area to tap into? What's sort of the look ahead?
Yeah, I was talking to one of the main analysts left in the space. There aren't many, yesterday, and we had this exact conversation. And right now I think we're sticking with our strategy of kind of small ball almost, because it's accretive. It's you're avoiding the big risk where you can't afford to be wrong right now because the capital isn't there. So the idea of, yes, we're looking to kind of rinse and repeat what we've been doing, find an accretive opportunity, find retail, turn it into our model. I don't think it's appreciated what we did with that store. That store was run by a private that's now part of a different public. But I think we 4x that store in 12 months.
Yeah.
And so it's, we have a really effective retail model that, just really works. And and it's extremely accretive, right? We paid $3 million for that store, and it's done a marvelous job for us already, and I don't think it's done. And so we're looking to kind of rinse and repeat what we do well. That being said, we're always having a secondary kind of path of bigger kind of consolidation, M&A conversations going on, right? This industry is going to be consolidated. It hasn't been consolidated because there just hasn't been the capital to, nor do the companies have the currencies to. I think rescheduling is going to unlock all of that, right? It's going to unlock the lower cost of capital. It's going to unlock the reprieve from 280. It's going to unlock consolidation. I think it's inevitable. It happens in every industry, right? You're not going to have, a million small operators and independents. You're going to see a lot of consolidation into bigger operators. It doesn't mean there can't be smaller craft operators. There absolutely can. There is in, the alcohol industry, right? That can absolutely exist. But I think we'd be fooling ourselves to think that everything's going to stay the same, right? I mean, there's going to be consolidation, some by necessity because some companies don't have a path and are distressed, some more strategically, right? In the being part of something bigger, better, that has more opportunity moving forward. So you're weighing all of these things all the time, but they all pivot on, what happens on the reform basis or lack of, right? If nothing happens, then you're taking a different approach.
Yeah.
And so you have to be nimble. It's easy. I would say it's easier for a smaller company like us to be nimble. We have less moving parts to pivot. Should something happen in the near term, we can act, quickly and accordingly. So, unfortunately, there's so limited capital available for these operators right now that you can't take a big swing right now. Who wants to use their stock trading below sales, below one-time sales, right? Like it's really hard to be creative in that world. I've mentioned this before, right? Privates don't tend to, when the publics, get cut in half, the privates don't tend to think they're worth half, right? So it's really hard to kind of have those conversations and be like, well, we trade at, 0.7 times. So therefore, you're not worth the 2 times you think you're worth. Like you're always having these kinds of conversations. And the swings are so wild in this space. You could be, and I think it's often it's why M&A doesn't make it to the finish line in this industry. There's been a heck of a lot more M&A that has started than completed, right? Most companies are always trying to get bigger, better, find more efficient ways to be an operator, right? But you have these conversations all the time, and some of them can make it quite far down the line, but in the end, they can't make it across the line because the market is so wild the way it is, that it's how do you pin down valuations in a world where you can be minus 40 in a week on nothing? Nothing happened. Like I had somebody ask me what happened. It's like, well, nothing actually happened, other than one thing that the industry was at least hoping for, the free-for-all kind of gas station weed kind of having to be forced into the same kind of restrictions that we have, right? That's about all that's happened. But that's not how the market read it. So
again, I think you're right. Should be ultimately a net positive, especially if that puts us on the path that we think that we're on in terms of getting a regulated space open with rescheduling or descheduling, but likely rescheduling, I think, first. But yeah, I think it's the uncertainty element that is really tough. I think, I think it's ultimately an industry that's kind of aching to reach that maturation and kind of move through like a normal industry would. I think when the kind of scheduling stuff gets resolved, it can finally move in that direction, whether that's M&A or some of those other things that we talked about. So hopefully we see that soon.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's so little organic growth in the industry right now. Some point to price compression, some point to the gas station, weed, the effect that hemp has had on siphoning off growth. We had double-digit organic growth in the last year,
Yeah.
and the market has completely ignored it. And we're relatively small, so I get that. There's a lot of large companies in the space that trade at very cheap multiples. So it's not a woe is me kind of attitude. It's more there's nothing more accretive to a company than organic growth, right? You're not paying extra for it. Whereas, inorganic M&A, there's a cost to that stuff. So someone had pinged me, I think, on X saying, great growth, but people want to know what you're going to do next. Nobody seems to care about the organic growth. And it's like, well, it should be the opposite. You should be really excited about the organic growth and less excited about us, paying for additional growth, right? So, but this is the market we live in. So
that is true. Although I think it helps in having the conversations and kind of explaining that and having that communication, I think, to, highlight that ultimately, because it is important ultimately. All right. Well, that's fantastic. So two final things. One, I just want to make sure that you can point people, if they want to follow along more with the C21 story, where they can go. And then wrapping it up, just sort of, what's keeping you excited about cannabis right now? I feel like there's a lot. I know you have a personal connection as well, but
yeah. Well, I mean, feel free to ping me on X anytime. I'm happy to do calls with investors. I do it all the time, or prospective investors or anybody who just wants to talk about the sector, because I do those calls all the time as well. I love the space. I love the industry, the sector, and the people in it. And I'm here for everybody and anybody that wants to have conversation. And I'm happy to provide more color about what our story, what we've been doing and what we are trying to accomplish anytime. As far as what I'm excited about, I mean, on a personal note, I don't know if everybody knows this. I was in a really bad car accident 13 years ago. I was hit on the highway and suffered kind of a permanent spinal injury, really bad, hundreds of thousands of dollars of rehab and treatment and years of my life. And I probably haven't been in as good of shape as I am right now in terms of there was a pain program that I was admitted to in Canada. It's the only one covered by the government. And I've only been doing it for a few weeks, but it's really transforming how I feel. And it's also helping me reduce my need for kind of pain meds and really just rely on cannabis to manage kind of the chronic pain and the day-to-day. That's why I'm in this industry. It's what I'm most excited about in this industry. I think we needed, rescheduling years ago so that this, the benefits of this plant could be researched and we could start focusing on, form factors that could help people with neuropathic pain, someone like me, and all the other ailments that people suffer from, where, this is a plant and a product, I think, that is a heck of a lot healthier as an option than the kind of pharma path that most people are forced into to band-aid or solve these things for them, right? So I'm dramatically down on my need for kind of pharma meds to manage pain, and am really excited about kind of getting to zero on that after a long decade. And I still think that this industry is in, I think it was Craig Fox did an article on this last year. He called it the first inning still. And I really still believe that that's where we are. It doesn't feel that way for any of us that have been invested since, 2017, 2018. The roller coaster that it's been through the Canadian legalization and, the delays in federal reform in the US, but it's still early innings, and the demand for THC has really never been higher. The demand for cannabinoids, I think the promise for the plant is never been greater. And we're all going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. Unfortunately, it's going a lot slower than any of us hope or think is necessary. because we think there's enough evidence at least to, unlock the benefits of the plant, right? The HHS FDA report itself had some pretty glaring comparisons to alcohol as, the benefits of this plant. And I don't know why they're still stuck at Congress. Some people have the conspiracy theories that the alcohol lobby and, pharma lobbies and things like this, what we do know with the federal government in the US is that the lobby has a lot of power. And we don't have a lot of power in the lobby in our industry, right? It's very poorly funded. It's very poorly organized. So maybe that's why we haven't affected the change that we should have by now. But I'm excited I see a whole bunch of companies that, are not distressed, that still have a really solid path forward, even though growth has stalled, or, some of the states that, have been slow to come online. If you think of a Virginia or something like that, legalized, but has been stuck because of a prohibitionist governor. Pennsylvania, for some reason, can't seem to get there, even though everybody around them has gotten there.
Yeah.
Florida obviously looks like that's going to be another ballot initiative in 26, which is exciting, being probably the most important state moving forward to find rec, ideally, hopefully. And then obviously there's, the broader global kind of demand that we're seeing with Europe and elsewhere, right? So, and we're seeing it's not cyclical. I mean, the decline in alcohol, I'm very anti alcohol. This kind of happened to me, doing research over the last decade or so for the pain and just the damage that alcohol causes the body and stuff like that. So I don't drink at all. But just the decline that we're seeing in the alcohol industry right now, I think it's permanent. I think, young people are much more focused on their health and their well-being and are much more interested in cannabis as a solution, versus the older generations that had leaned on alcohol so heavily, and which causes so many, problems in society.
Yes.
Billions and billions of dollars of problems, for a society, and, the health damage, obviously, that everybody knows that it causes. So I'm excited. It doesn't feel that way on a day-to-day basis sometimes when you stare at, tickers on a screen.
Sure.
But you have to keep kind of checking yourself and zooming out and remembering that we're kind of part of a burgeoning new industry that is growing, that people are really, finding solutions through cannabis, like I have, and that there's a really blue sky path ahead. How it's going to play out for the existing operators remains to be seen, but hopefully we're all part of it.
Yep. I would definitely echo what you said so well in terms of, kind of the groundswell and support and change, whether it's on sort of the fun side to relax, where in the face of better options without sort of the prohibitionist or not prohibitionist, sort of the propaganda around cannabis being kind of stripped back and stripped away. I think that's been great. And of course, on a personal level, but I know so many people out there for different reasons or different, needs ultimately have been turning to cannabis and realizing that it can be a solution for them. So I think while, there can be lobbying money, and I think that can present problems, I do think more and more people pushing in the same direction and demanding this and demanding that regulated, safe version that they can depend on and rely on and understand the dosage and all those things that are super important is something that really will keep pushing us ahead. So I think fantastically said, well captured. Thanks for making the time. As always, really appreciate it. I
Thank you.
Appreciate all the insight as well as always. And it's just great to kind of chat as well. So I really appreciate the time.
Always.
Everyone, thanks for joining. Really, really appreciate it as well. Some great questions out there. So thanks for those. And we'll hope you join us next time. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.